Chapter 5. Down, down, through the shadows and the shredded spider webs, down through the astringent creosote stink and the underlying foulness of black mold, Junior descended the tower stairs with utmost caution. If he tripped on a loose tread and fell and broke a leg, he might lie here for days, dying of thirst or infection or of exposure if the weather turned cooler, tormented by whatever predators found him helpless in the night. Hiking into the wilds alone was never wise. He always relied on the buddy system, sharing the risk. But his buddy had been Naomi, and she wasn't here for him anymore. When he was all the way down, when he was out from under the tower, he hurried toward the dirt lane. The car was hours away by the challenging overland route they had taken to get here, but maybe half an hour, at most 45 minutes away, if he returned by the fire road. After only a few steps, Junior halted. He dared not bring the authorities back to this ridgetop, only to discover that poor Naomi, though critically injured, was still clinging to life. 150 feet, approximately 15 stories, was not a fall that anyone could be expected to survive. On the other hand, miracles do occasionally happen. Not miracles in the sense of gods and angels and saints goofing around in human affairs. Junior didn't believe in any such nonsense. But amazing singularities do happen, he muttered, because he had a relentlessly mathematical scientific view of existence, which allowed for many astounding anomalies, for mysteries of astonishing mechanical effect, but which provided no room for the supernatural. With more trepidation than seemed reasonable, he circled the base of the tower. Tall grass and weeds tickled his bare calves. At this season, no insects were buzzing, no gnats trying to sip at the sweat on his brow. Slowly, warily, he approached the crumpled form of his fallen wife. In 14 months of marriage, Naomi never raised her voice to him, was never cross with him. She never looked for a fault in a person if she could find a virtue. And she was the type who could find a virtue in everyone but child molesters and murderers. He dreaded finding her still alive, because for the first time in their relationship, she would surely be filled with reproach. She would no doubt have harsh, perhaps bitter words for him, and even if he could quickly silence her, his lovely memories of their marriage would be tarnished forever. Henceforth, every time he thought of his golden Naomi, he would hear her shrill accusations, see her beautiful face contorted and made ugly by anger. How sad it would be to have so many cherished recollections spoiled forever. He rounded the northwest corner of the tower and saw Naomi lying where he expected her to be, not sitting up and brushing the pine needles out of her hair, just lying twisted and still. Nevertheless, he halted, reluctant to go closer. He studied her from a safe distance, squinting in the bright sunlight, alert for the slightest twitch. In the windless, bugless, lifeless silence, he listened, half expecting her to take up one of her favorite songs, Somewhere Over the Rainbow or What a Wonderful World. But in a thin, crushed, tuneless voice choked with blood and rattling with broken cartilage. He was working himself into a state, and for no good reason. She was almost certainly dead, but he had to be sure. And to be sure, he had to take a closer look, no way around it. A quick look, and then away into an eventful and interesting future. As soon as he stepped closer, he knew why he had been reluctant to approach Naomi. He had been afraid that her beautiful face would be hideously disfigured, torn and crushed. Junior was squeamish. He didn't like war movies or mystery flicks in which people were shot or stabbed or even discreetly poisoned, because they always had to show you the body, as if you couldn't take their word for it that someone had been killed and just get on with the plot. He preferred love stories and comedies. He'd once picked up a Mickey Spillane thriller and been sickened by the relentless violence. He'd almost been unable to finish the book, but he considered it a character flaw not to complete a project that one had begun, even if the task was to read a repulsively bloody novel. In war movies and thrillers, he immensely enjoyed the action, The action didn't trouble him. He was disturbed by the aftermath. Too many movie makers and novelists were intent on showing you the aftermath, as if that were as important as the story itself. The entertaining part, however, was the movement, the action, not the consequences. If you had a runaway train scene and the train hit a busload of nuns at a crossing, smashing it the hell out of the way and roaring on, you wanted to follow that train, not go back and see what had happened to the luckless nuns. Dead or alive, the nuns were history once the damn bus was slammed off the tracks. And what mattered was the train. Not consequences, but momentum. Now, here on this sunny ridge in Oregon, miles from any train and farther still from any nuns, Junior applied this artistic insight to his own situation, overcame his squeamishness, and regained some momentum of his own. He approached his fallen wife, stood over her, and stared down into her fixed eyes as he said, "Naomi." He didn't know why he'd spoken her name, because at first sight of her face he was certain that she was dead. He detected a note of melancholy in his voice, and he supposed that already he was missing her. If her eyes had shifted focus in response to his voice, if she had blinked to acknowledge him, Junior might not have been entirely displeased, depending on her condition. Paralyzed from the neck down and posing no physical threat, brain damage to the extent that she couldn't speak or write or in any other way convey to the police what had happened to her, yet with her beauty largely intact, she might still have been able to enrich his life in many ways. Under the right circumstances, with sweet Naomi as gloriously attractive as ever, but as pliable and unjudgmental as a doll, Junior might have been willing to give her a home and care. Talk about action without consequences. She was, however, as dead as a toad in the wake of a Mack truck, and of no more interest to him now than would be a busload of train-smacked nuns. Remarkably, her face was nearly as stunning as ever. She had landed face up, so the damage was largely to her spine and the back of her head. Junior didn't want to think about what her posterior cranium might look like. Happily, her cascading golden hair hid the truth. Her facial features were ever so slightly distorted, which suggested the greater ruin underneath, but the result was neither sad nor grotesque. Indeed, the distortion gave her the lopsided, perky, and altogether appealing grin of a mischievous G-A-M-I-N-E. Lips parted as though she just said something wonderfully witty. He was puzzled that so few traces of gore stained her rocky bed, until he realized that she had died instantly upon impact, stopped so abruptly her heart hadn't pumped blood out of her wounds. He knelt beside her and gently touched her face. Her skin was still warm. Ever the sentimentalist, Junior kissed her goodbye. Only once. Lingeringly, but only once, and with no tongue involved. Then he returned to the fire road and headed south along the serpentine dirt track at a fast walk. When he reached the first turn in the narrow road, he paused to look back toward the top of the ridge. The high tower imprinted its ominous black geometry upon the sky. The surrounding forest seemed to shrink from it, as if nature chose no longer to embrace the structure. Above the tower and to one side, 3 crows had appeared as though by spontaneous generation. They circled over the spot where Naomi lay like Sleeping Beauty, kissed but unawakened. Crows are carrion eaters. Reminding himself that action was what mattered, not aftermath, Junior Kane resumed his journey down the fire road. He moved at an easy jog now instead of a fast walk, chanting aloud in the way that Marines chanted when they ran in training groups. But because he did not know any Marine chants, he grunted the words to Somewhere Over the Rainbow, without melody, roughly in time with his footfalls, on his way to neither the halls of Montezuma nor the shores of Tripoli, but to a future that now promised to be one of exceptional experience and unending surprises.